So now we launch into the Noahic Covenant. In this sorry situation where the earth filled with evil, and as the Bible says, every thought of man's heart, only evil continually, God decides to, as it were, press the rewind on salvation history, go back to the beginning when the earth was plunged underwater in Genesis 1 verse 2, create that once more, the earth plunged underwater, and then bring the dry land out once again, and start with a new Adam figure whom we are calling Noah. So this is what we rephrase as the Noahic Covenant. And God sends this great flood to plunge the earth underwater, but at the end of the flood, there's our flood waters receding here, we have a kind of new Eden called Ararat. So Mount Ararat arises as the new dry land, and Noah, of course, has built the ark, and the ark comes to rest on the top of Mount Ararat. The ark we should think of as a kind of floating Garden of Eden, because after all, it is a zoological garden. That's the phrase from which we get the term zoo, of course, right? So it's filled with living things, not so much plants, but in this case, animals, right? So it's full of all of the life of the earth. The ark is also built on 3 levels, and many scholars have noted this is an anticipation of the temple, which is the only other structure that we know in the Bible built on 3 levels. So the ark is a reminiscent reality of Eden, as well as an anticipation of the later temple. And the ark floats on top of the waters and comes to rest there on Mount Ararat after the flood. And Noah lets down the gangplank, and out come the animals, out come the snakes. Snakes are easy to draw. Out come the giraffes. Don't worry, we're not going to draw all the animals. We're just going to do the snakes and giraffes. We do the snakes because they're so easy, and we do the giraffes because I like giraffes. And these are not brontosauruses now. These are clearly giraffes. No one would ever make a mistake as to what those are. And, of course, Noah gets out of the ark and builds an altar. We'll put Noah over here. We'll put his hands upraised in prayer as the first thing that he does when he gets off the ark is built an altar and offer sacrifice to God. And it says that the sweet-smelling sacrifice went up, and God smelled the sweet-smelling aroma and said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground for man's sake, etc. Of course, I always feel kind of sorry for that sheep that Noah sacrificed right off the ark. That sheep thought he was lucky to get a ticket on the ark in the first place. And then after 150 days, rocking on the waters, he gets out. There's green grass everywhere. The sun is shining. But Noah's saying, hey, you, I got a special job for you. No! Yes, that's the way it goes. But that's why we brought 7 pairs of sheep along after all. They are the clean animals. They were appropriate for sacrifice, and we knew we were going to have to use some of them when we got off the ark. We didn't want them to go extinct. In any event, when the sweet-smelling aroma goes up, it says that God smelled that and said he would no longer curse the earth. And then God renews that covenant that he once made with Adam, now with Noah, saying to Noah now, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. The fear of you will fall upon the animals, etc. So that sonship is recreated or restored. We'll write down here, sonship restored. As Noah is now taken into a covenant relationship with God, and of course a covenant forms a family relationship, in this case a father-son relationship between God and Noah. But unfortunately, some of the shalom is lost We recall that in the Garden of Eden, there was no carnivorous activity. The green plants were given to everyone, the animals as well as to Adam for food. But after Noah gets off the ark, Noah is given permission to eat the animals, and the fear of Noah falls upon the animals. And this is an indication that there's been some disruption in the otherwise perfect relationship between man and God, what we call that vertical relationship. That was a perfect relationship with Adam before the fall, and therefore also there was perfect peace with the rest of creation. Now there is a restoration of the relationship, but it's imperfect, and that reflects also in some antagonism or some imperfection in man's relationship with his environment as well. But let's concentrate on the positive, the fact that sonship is restored here in Genesis 8 and 9. And once more, we have a new father of the human race in Noah, and a new family in terms of his wife and his sons and their wives. And there is the hope that once more a peaceful relationship between God and humanity may develop as humanity is blessed and multiplies and fills the earth. So the question is, what happened after the covenant with Noah? Everything seems to be going so great. Shouldn't the earth be filled with human beings in a peaceful relationship with God? Well, unfortunately, we don't even get out of Genesis 9 before Noah himself sins. And how does he sin? Well, it's a sin that begins with the consumption of fruit. You see, he plants a vineyard and drinks of the wine from the grapes produced, so consuming the fruit of the vineyard in the form of wine. And because he gets drunk off the wine from his vineyard, he gets naked in his tent, and his son Ham comes in and does something shameful to him. And then when Noah awakes, he curses some of his own descendants. Well, that is very sad. And we can actually line that up, those different elements of what Noah does. And we begin to see a pattern there. We got that consumption of fruit. That leads to Noah's drunkenness. And why was it wrong for Noah to become drunk? Well, you see, Noah is a new priest, just like Adam was a priest. And as we find out later in the book of Leviticus, priests can never get drunk. It's forbidden in the law of God, because since priests exercise sacred powers, if they lose their power of rationality, they may misuse these other sacred abilities that have been given to them in an inappropriate way, and so that is forbidden. And that in fact happens with Noah, because not only does he become drunk, but then that leads to him becoming naked. This is another reason why priests were not allowed to drink strong drink, because they were never supposed to allow themselves to be humiliated, because as representatives of God, they were always supposed to maintain a certain kind of representative divine dignity. Well, Noah fails in that as well. So both the drunkenness and the nakedness are failures of his priestly role. And then we said his son Ham comes in and does something shameful to him. We don't know exactly what. There's suggestions in the text. It really doesn't matter what specifically the action was, but it resulted in Noah then putting a curse on some of Ham's descendants. And when we line things up like this, we see the resemblance to the fall in the Garden of Eden, and we suddenly recognize, oh my goodness, this is a repeat, or what we say in the theological tradition is a recapitulation of the fall of Adam and Eve in the garden. And so through the fall of Noah, this is recorded in Genesis 9, verses 20 on, through the fall of Noah, sin is reintroduced into human history, and things again go from bad to worse, until a few chapters later in Genesis 11, all of Noah's descendants gather together and they build a tower of defiance against God. This great tower that they erect as a sign of their unity in rebellion against God and their refusal to spread out over the face of the earth, but instead they all want to remain in one place and form a great city that will defy God's law and form a culture in disobedience to God's will for humanity. So that leads us to a very sorry situation. Of course, God comes down, confuses the languages of Noah's descendants at the Tower of Babel. That forces them to be scattered over the face of the earth. But now we're in a situation where human beings are alienated from each other because they can't understand each other's languages, and they're alienated from God because they've been acting in disobedience to Him. So what are we going to do to gather the whole human family back together, form it once more, and lead it into a peaceful covenant relationship with God? Well, that's where Abraham comes in our next covenant, which is going to be the Abrahamic covenant.